let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything plus size. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show Brooke Bralove.
Hello.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm great.
Good, we're doing good. Listen, we were very much looking forward to this one. So when we put out the original, seeing who might be interested in having a conversation with us within our community, there are people of certain professions that people have always said, oh, if you could speak to someone like this, we would want to know, like, let's have that conversation and really dig. So when you came back to us, we thought this is such an awesome opportunity to ask some questions, get to know a little bit about you and the work that you do, and just have a really good conversation. So Brooke, my love, are you ready to get into it?
I'm totally ready.
Fabulous. Well, listen, I think a first place to start, tell us a little bit about yourself. For the listeners who haven't come across you, what do you want the people to know about you?
So my name is Brooke Bralove. I'm a psychotherapist and licensed clinical social worker. I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist, which I think is the real reason I'm here. And yeah, I practice in Bethesda, Maryland, which is right outside DC. So got a lot of type A people in my practice who need help with anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. So that's what I specialize in. And I also do a really brief trauma using rapid eye movement that changes the way the brain stores distressing images and emotions. And that's called accelerated resolution therapy. And that's also very exciting and creates really quick lasting change.
And what inspired you to go into the field of psychotherapy?
Well, I feel really blessed because my parents got me into therapy when I was 9 years old. I was a very anxious kid, and they saw that and realized that that was a little bit outside of, the regular parenting deal, and that they really weren't equipped to handle all of it. And so I got into therapy, and I think I just carried that with me my whole life, right? There was no taboo about it. It was very open in my family. And so I really just learned that therapy is great and awesome and helps you. And so I just took that with me. And, I had some I didn't always know I wanted to be a therapist. That's one thing. People ask me that. So I came about to therapy really through policy. So I was much more interested in social justice policy, low-income housing. I did some work there and finally realized that some of the things were systemic and really I felt like I'm not going to be able to make a dent. And so I really made that decision once I went to social work school to really focus on the individual and couples. And so I've felt like I've really made a difference just on a one-to-one basis. And that has been more pleasurable for me, more gratifying, and I just love what I do. I love sitting with people, hearing stories. I don't consider the fact that I sit around and listen to people's problems and don't go to a therapist who would ever say such a thing, because that's not really what we do. We don't really do that. So
That's really cool. I feel like we're a part of that generation where we're really starting to see the great unpacking of, like, stigma around the idea of psychotherapy. Tim, I feel like you've alluded to this in the past, that perhaps members of your own family would be a little bit side-eyeing, perhaps, of the therapeutic I know mine would. So
Certain members of my family, yeah, they would. I mean, I have family members that are currently in therapy, and I don't know. They don't really ever talk about it. That's the thing. No one in my family ever really talks about the elephant in the room. Like most families, we just compartmentalize and try to keep the peace for the sake of a family dinner.
yeah, that's like most families for sure.
But it's really cool that you've been in therapy since such an early age. I mean, I almost want to ask, like, what do you think makes that sense of adolescence different for you compared to other people? But then, of course, that was your experience. So you wouldn't know what everyone else went through because that's not your experience.
Well, I work with people every day who
Oh, right, yeah,
grew
yeah.
up, right? So all I hear is therapy was completely stigmatized, especially in minority communities, African
Mm,
American communities, Latino communities, where, the idea is we do not talk about this outside of this house, literally. And so I mean, it's frankly quite almost rebellious sometimes for someone to come to therapy and decide to do this. It's very brave. I always encourage people. I mean, I always praise them for coming in if this, especially if they're, much older and this is their first time in therapy. I mean, that is really brave. You're breaking family tradition. You're exposing secrets, obviously, to someone who can never share them, but it's still really scary. And I don't think we're doing any, service to our kids if we raise them that way. But again, I have to tell you, I've got two teenage daughters, and they all talk about going to therapy. They all talk about, being on medication with no stigma. And
mm,
that really makes me excited for the future because, as we know, mental health is health. And it
mm.
really is almost even more important because you could have a body that works, but if your brain is, feeding you lies about depression and anxiety, I mean, you can't do a lot of the things you want to do. And so I think mental health is absolutely critical. I also will say that I'm very grateful to celebrities who talk about going to therapy. I'm really grateful because I actually, and Prince Harry, I don't know what he's called now, sorry, Duke
Be
of
fine.
Windsor or something, but he talked about doing EMDR, which is similar to the accelerated resolution therapy, trauma therapy. He's been very open, and I think the more that happens, the less stigma we're going to have, and the more people are just going to get the help they've always needed, but have never known it's okay to ask for.
Mm, absolutely. I mean, ugh, I think anyone who's been on a mental health journey can really take a step back and go, yeah, I convinced myself in my shit mental health that everything is fine and this is how things are supposed to be and I'm just going to keep going and everything's going to be fine. And it's not fine. And there really is such a weight off the shoulder to just go and say, oh God, I'm really not fucking okay.
Right.
Uh, Even if it is just that, like that alone is already like oh my God. But then to know that there are people out there whose job it is to be like, it is in my best interest that you get the help you need and that we walk you through whatever it is that needs to happen here. So let me help you do the thing. Like, there is such a reassurance that there is processes out there like that. And to zero in, you had said it before, you are a sex certified sex therapist. You help folk navigate their sexuality, identity, related trauma and dysfunctions, and pleasure. And
Mhm.
I'd like to know, how often does your work focus on kink, fetish, and atypical sexual narratives?
Mhm. So again, I mentioned I'm right outside Washington, D.C. So we do have a lot of, I mean, I do work a lot with cis hetero, couples. That would probably be the majority, but I'm, listed on websites that encourage people who are kinky or polyamorous. And so I do get, some couples and some individuals. I get, I've worked with people who identify as asexual. They have not necessarily stayed that way based on just, personal things. But I mean, I fully support asexuality as a legitimate sexuality. But so they do. I mean, I will say there's also a really fascinating thing that I do find, which is a lot of very conservative white cis men are very
Mm-hmm.
kinky and not just kinky, but very submissive. And
Oh,
Oh.
what a
that's
surprise.
right, right.
What a
Right,
shock.
right.
Yes.
But, I don't think at least, some of the people who would listen to this from sort of my circle wouldn't know that. They really wouldn't know that. And I think if you're, in the kink world, that's sort of like, duh. But I don't think we, sort of in some of the communities I circle, like that's like something anybody really knows about. So, you know,
I think as kinky queer men, we both kind of take for granted that people don't always think about or they don't experience the things that we experience. Something that might look
Mm,
like, oh my God, this is the wildest thing I've ever seen. For us, it's like, girl, you haven't been here on a Tuesday. Like,
Yeah, right.
100%. Conversations that mirror other tropisms we see around the world, right? Like even the current trends of AI. As a person who's terminally online, I'll admit that I feel like I can clock an AI image at 30 paces.
Yeah.
But the amount of instances, of course, that will happen where people will say, I'm a parent who doesn't get to be online because I'm too busy raising my children, and I have been duped by an AI advert for something, and I'm frustrated. I don't really have the time to process all this, and the people who are chronically online are like, oh, well, it should have been obvious. No, like, not all things are all things to all people in the exact same way, and the presumption that it's all going to function the same is probably a big through line of, like, a lot of the problems we see in the world in general. Like, we shouldn't presume that everyone has the same references, everyone has the same experiences. If someone says, this is new, a struggle, let's just go, okay,
Right.
and take it from there.
Yeah, and let's accept that that's, I mean, in therapy, we always say you meet people where they are. If you do not meet them exactly where they are, they will tune out, they will feel othered, all of that. And again, that all of us know we want to feel loved and accepted and seen and witnessed and heard for literally exactly who we are, right? Not on the outside, but on the inside. And, I think in some of the communities, where, especially when we're talking about kink or, feeder, all of it, you're really looking at people who have struggled so much with all the internalized messages that I think, you're really having to break down and do a lot of individual work to unlearn these loud, loud voices that have damaged people, since they were born, right?
And I'd be curious, given your field of expertise, like, how would you advise someone in developing a healthier and more open conversations about their sexual needs and boundaries?
hmm So I think that's where I would start with know thyself. So, of course, you cannot have a conversation with someone about your needs, your pleasures, your do's and don'ts if you have no idea what those are for yourself. So, the first thing I really talk about is building kind of like internal clarity way before you talk about external communication. And that itself could take years. It might take 5 days. It might, you've always known, you have no, you're completely clear, and that's great. But I do think when we're navigating sort of alternative lifestyle, I'm sure you all hate that word. Maybe you can maybe you can teach me a better one, but that's sort of how we talk about it, here in the nation's capital. But different relationship structures, that kind of thing. You usually need to really help people just come to terms with who they are themselves. So I think that's first. The other thing is, I think especially in your specific community, really understanding and distinguishing things like desire, curiosity, pleasure, sexual identity, sexual preference, and really getting clear what each of those means for you, because you might use language that says, I am a, feeder, and that is my identity, right? That is literally who I am. And someone else might say, this is a kink. It's not who I am. It's something I do behaviorally, or it's nothing I do behaviorally, and it's simply fantasy, right? And so again, I think being able to talk and differentiate first after you've kind of figured out who you are. The other thing, and I'm, sure you guys talk about this all the time, right? But, consent is not kind of a one-time thing. Like, I give you consent once and that's it, and I never have to renegotiate it. I can't change my mind, things like that. So obviously, you're always looking for enthusiastic yeses in every way, and then rechecking those consents. Hey, last time you were kind of cool with this. What are you feeling today? Or, has anything shifted for you? Please let me know. And I always say consent is always reversible, and making sure that you choose partners who understand that fully. So there is not abuse, right? Abuse can happen in any community. I don't think just because we've decided, we're kinky or we're into BDSM, that somehow that means we can't violate boundaries and consent. And I just think, I can curse on here, right?
Yeah, yeah, baby, please,
Okay.
yes.
All right, so there's shitty fucking people everywhere, right? And there's
Yes.
shitty fucking people in your community, in my community, in that community, and that's the way it is. And so taking time to build trust through language and, communication is literally the key. Another thing I like to talk about is, before you are sharing your dirtiest, darkest secret and preferences, talk about how you want to communicate. So how do you like to talk about sex? How do you like to talk about your kinks? How do you like to share them? And again, don't come out with the thing that is most shameful for you or the hardest to talk about. Come out with a little thing like, I like a little spanking every once in a while, right? That's a low stakes reveal, and then you get to see how the person responds, and then you can build up. I don't suggest people kind of, right off the bat share something that is very difficult for them or something they've struggled with, because then you might reinforce shaming and you haven't built that trust yet.
All of this, my God, I feel like we could talk for about 7 hours just on every one of the points that you've made here. But you know what? We're going to let that sit. And I'm going to take this opportunity to remind you all that these are absolutely things we have spoken about on the podcast before. Go back through the back catalogue, find the conversations, listen to them and enjoy them. But Brooke is here right now, affirming a lot of what we talk about with you all, which is that we need to understand the differences between the fantasy elements of the gaming lifestyle and the reality elements, right? Sometimes there's crossover, sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's a case of we need to have more conversation because not all of us share the exact same desires. And the reality that we seem to be unpacking in this latest season, which is that there is a real sense of moralism of people who enter into certain spaces. They've had some form of question and resolved it insofar as it affects themselves. And they go, well, I'm okay. And then they walk into the space, which is built for them to be a part of, and they say, well, this is what I am. And then they see all the other people who do different things that also share that space, and then they go, bad, wrong. Yes. I'm right and you're wrong. And it's very like, oh, I think we have some trauma that we need to unpack there. I think there's some...
Unfortunately, I see that happen a lot in the bear community. I've seen some bears be very judgmental of other things that they can be very judgmental of gainers and feeders. They can be very judgmental of people who are into leather. And it's something, and I don't know if it's, I only have Cleveland to go on, right? Because that's my community. But in my community, I have heard them over talking like that. Like years ago, because I'm also a leather man, and my road into it was pup play.
Mm-hmm.
So years ago, we were at a local bar. We were downstairs. We wanted to put out the mats for the puppies in a place that was completely out of the way. It wasn't going to be where anyone was sitting. And I just overheard these bears talking about us like we were crazy, And I'm just like, we are all looked at askance by society, point blank. Like, why do you want to infight on top of that?
Right. Yeah. And I just use the thing I used to use with my girls when they were very little is don't yuck someone's yum. I mean, it's just as simple as that, right? How is that ever going to make anybody feel good, right? So save your, oh my God, gasping for when you're alone in the bathroom, right? Save your big, big response for later. You would never want someone to respond to you in that way. And so, again, this is where I feel like empathy and self-compassion can really just get caught. Like, everyone desires compassion, and we struggle enough with self-compassion. So when you are, shitting on someone else's literally preferences, right? And saying, really, again, it's sort of a moral judgment, like that's wrong, that's not the proper way. you are actually working against yourself in what you're trying to create in your own communities.
It makes me think of Alok Menon, who is a fabulous speaker in the non-binary space. And
Yes.
it makes me think of the point that they make on why so many people have issues with trans and non-binary people. And as they express, you see in me the freedom that you want for yourself.
Mhm.
You acknowledge that you clipped your wings. And it does break my heart that you did that, because you shouldn't have had to do that. But unfortunately, in this moment, you look at the freedom and the love that I walk in, and you feel such anger that you don't have that, that you would rather take it from me so that no one can have it, rather than just join me in the freedom of what this is that you clearly want. That is why you're obsessed with it, because you want this, and it's okay. Baby, just come over here. And I think it's a lot of the same thing. So it's so easy to go, I don't get to have what I want to have, or I have shrunk myself or limited myself. This is a common experience with people who are afraid to start the gaining journey. There's a societal pressure that says, this is wrong, don't do this. Mm-hmm. And they battle this idea. They go, well, I want this, but everyone else says I shouldn't have this. What do I do? Unfortunately, my love, no one can make that decision for you. You've got to be the one. And I think the answer is, if this is for you, loving yourself means, with respect to everything that you are, walking forward into it and figuring that out. And all of this conversation is just oh, yes, all of it.
Well, and again, to your initial point, I mean, I think that it's the difference between envy and jealousy. So envy is, I also want that freedom, right? I also wish I could express myself in all the ways, whether it is exactly this way or completely different. But where we see, thou doth protest too much, is the jealousy, which means if I can't have it, you can't have it, right? And so that's the problem. Envy, if expressed, is actually wonderful. It helps you understand more about yourself. God, I'm feeling envious. Maybe I do want that more than I knew or thought. But it's a jealousy part that says, if I can't have it, you can't have it, right? And unfortunately, that just feels like the time we're living in right now, 100%. It just feels like that just seeps into everything, right? Just take, take, take.
And so we've been talking about themes of shame, vulnerability, self-compassion, and how important it is, both like in the therapeutic process and in our everyday lives. How might some of those themes show up for someone like me? Like, I'm back in the dating pool after 7 years of a committed relationship. And you were suggesting about how to maybe do with a soft lead, so. I don't know if you could specifically recommend, but what date do you think I should do the whole talking about my kinks and fetishes? Should that be second date, third date?
Okay, well, I think right away I want to say, how'd you meet? Did you meet on a kinky site? Did you meet on a non-kink site? Right? So
Yeah.
that's context, right? I mean, if you met under the, and again, I don't know, field or FetLife, you've already introduced it. And so I would say that's much more organic, and you can feel that out. Likely that's going to be probably a topic right away, right? Because I mean, that is how you met. So I think it truly depends on context. If you meet them of course, I'm assuming you're only meeting people online, because I'm also single and I don't know how to meet anyone any other way. So I wish I
the
did.
days when we used to just go to dimly lit establishments and be drunk are over with now. So
yeah. So again, if you're meeting on a vanilla site, a regular dating site, I think you want to wait a little longer and, feel it out. Is this person kind? Does this person seem accepting of, how do they talk about other communities, right? Not just your own community. How do they speak? Are they empathic? Do they other people? And, we can figure this out, right? You just, talk about politics for 8 seconds and you can find out if somebody is into othering. If they're into othering, I wouldn't feel as safe. That wouldn't make me feel good. I also probably wouldn't like them very much, but that's also that. But I think I'm not a fan of naming things about dates, right? Like, you can't sleep with someone until the third date, and it feels I'm much more of a feeling things out. So use your gut, trust your instincts, and again, proceed slowly. And, if you have no shame, then you can, lead with it, but I just worry about tapping into people's shame in a way that is going to shut them down right away. And so I don't really want that for anyone. And so I do tend to be, a little more conservative, but if you meet them on, FetLife, then bring it. Let's talk about it, right? And they're going to want to probably right away too.
That part you said about we can feel this out and, sort of discern what's right for you really comes back to that first point you mentioned, which is know thyself. I think so many of us, and especially, as queer men, as kinksters, we grow up in a world that causes us to question our own reality. Are you really this thing? Are you really attracted to that thing? Maybe you just, and you learn to disempower your own driving force. And I think that is something that many of us really don't understand, that we need to come back to a sense of in our humanity, rather than just like our general sense of self, but like in our whole total self. We need to understand that, because I've certainly had those experiences of, well, I'm gay and I figured that out, so now I'm gonna sort of start moving forward in this, and I don't know what I'm doing, and a man looked at me nicely and he smiled at me, so I guess that means he loves me, and I guess that means everything's going to be okay. And you learn, unfortunately, the hard way that does not necessarily mean what you think it means. And it's only through developing that sense of self and confidence in my own assessment of the world around me that I now am able to be like, oh, I see you, I understand what this is, and I don't have to judge it. I don't have to be on board with it either. I can simply say, oh, thank you, but no thank you, and we can move forward. And it could be totally fine. But I would certainly say from my own experiences, that sense of knowing thyself is like, yes, absolutely, the very first motherfucking thing. Know yourself and what is right for you, period.
Right. And if you don't yet, then name that right away, right? I don't assume people are not in the same place on their journey at all times. And so I think to say, I always tell people, even in therapy, I don't know is a great answer. It's a real answer. Or I don't know yet. Or here are the things I'm doing to try to figure it out, and I'm hoping you might be part of that. Maybe you could be part of that if that works for you. So I do think the other thing, especially in your, communities, shame really reigns in secrecy, silence, and judgment. Okay, Brene Brown. I'm also certified in Brene Brown's work, so I do a lot with these concepts, right? And so what I like to try to look at, without needing to say it's trauma, it must be trauma, which a lot of people do. A lot of people say all, kinky people have trauma. That's what this is all about. And I don't think that's fair. I think that's bullshit. Some might. I mean, frankly, all of us have some types of trauma, whether they're very, very little, in terms of like empathic misses with parents, or they're, unfortunately very, very big. But to get underneath the behavior, right? And to understand more about the why. Because, it's not enough to say, I want to be, fed, in bed, whatever. What is that about? But not to pathologize it, to figure out, what is it about this? Like, what am I feeling in it? And then you could insert anything. What am I feeling in when I'm, playing basketball and I feel joy and pleasure. What is that? What does it remind me of? And so again, I think getting underneath some of the whys can be very useful and decrease shame, which is really the most important part around any of this, is to let go of the shame, right? Because where most of you, I imagine, start, whether, you're gay, bi, trans, whatever, is something is inherently wrong with me because I'm having these feelings, right? And I mean, how long does that take? That must take a long ass time, right? And again, I think, all of us understand this idea of something must be wrong with me. And it could be because we have depression, or it could be because, we like the same sex, or it could be because, I don't know, there are a lot of things. So it is a universal feeling. I don't want to say that it's only in certain communities, but I think it lasts longer and it's harder to go, because you're going uphill. I mean, you are. It sucks, but that's true. So again, decreasing the shame and trying to work through your own sense of something's wrong with me, because then you've got a really hard situation where what you find erotic or pleasurable or sensual becomes something you hate yourself for. And then you are really in a bind, right? You're really in a tough, tough bind. And I think that's often when people dissociate, they leave their bodies because they are feeling pleasure. And then that's scary to feel pleasure doing something that they've decided is wrong or bad or weird. And so then, right, dissociation and pleasure cannot coexist. You have to be in your body to feel pleasure. I mean, I'm not saying, by the way, that your brain can't experience pleasure, but I'm talking about kind of when you're doing things physically that cause pleasure. We want you in your body. We want you to get the benefits of what you're doing. How awesome that you get to feel this, right? And I think, there's a lot about caretaking with, feed. Again, I'm going to use feeder and fetus, but I'm not sure if that is okay or whatever.
No,
I'll just
no,
be honest, and I'm going to
no,
ask
that
questions.
Baby,
Yeah, I
and you know
mean,
what? Please do. That this is fabulous. Like, we want people to ask. Like, that's part of why we do the podcast, anyways. Because there's just no like communication on like what this community is or what it does outside of this. So please, any questions you got, bring them. Please do.
Right. And that's going to make us feel more connected. That's going to
Yes.
build trust right here, which I think, matters. I think it really matters. So I think, there's a lot about, like, a lot of cis white women worry about being too much, right? So what we do in relationships and sexually is we shrink ourselves. We really shrink. But a lot of what goes on in your community is the complete opposite. And so I will say what has come up for me is not necessarily that this is what I want to do for myself, for my life, but I love the idea of not shrinking oneself. Like, that is such a great model for me as a, cis white woman who has been taught that, it's not about my pleasure and I have to overfunction, so I have to shrink my needs. I've been called too much by a lot of people. And you know what? Where I'm out of a long-term relationship, and I'm like, man, I love my too muchness. Because for the right
Yes.
person, it's going to be just right. It's going to be
Just
Goldilocks.
enough,
Yeah.
baby. And do you want to know what's the phrase that people say today? You think I'm too much? Go and find less. How about that? Please do. Go and have your step one, your little box. Go and have what you need to have, what your capacity can handle. The
Right.
man who was ready for all of my muchness, the universe that I contain, he's
Yeah.
going to be blessed to have it all.
Yeah.
Go. And
So
also, add all of this.
yeah. And so again, I do really have some envy, right? Not going to take it away from you, not jealousy, but just envy of this sort of belief that I can take up as much space as I want to. And there's just something about that that feels really radical to me. But I think, again, we want to build that self-compassion as well, really just being gentle with yourself about what you like, about what you want. Because again, there's just radical shit happening every day, and how brave it is to do that. And I also think I like to use metaphors. So again, whether it's out of trauma or not, metaphors about appetite, metaphors about taking up space, metaphors about being too much, right? What happens in childhood is when we have any big feelings, we are told that's too much, shut it down, keep it in. Well, that is probably why a lot of you do what you do and like what you do, because you're saying fuck that shit. I'm not going to do those messages anymore. That has not worked well for me. I've harmed myself, literally harmed myself in many ways, emotionally, physically, or otherwise, whether it's trying to, fit into some ideal version of a body or a sexuality or an identity. And it's like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so I just love really kind of looking at metaphorically what's really happening. What is your appetite about? What is the need underneath the behavior? And to me, that's where you can meet the emotional needs, right? Because that's also what we want to do ultimately, right? We're meeting emotional needs through certain behaviors or fantasies.
And you don't know how relieved so many people are going to be to hear that, because quite often, like you said, like if you have a fetish, you have a kink, it can feel very isolating, because if it's, if it doesn't fall under the umbrella of the ones that are popular, like 50 Shades of Grey made BDSM popular, then it's immediately looked at as subversive or wrong. And like in our community, people use health as the argument against everything. Like that's their blanket statement for everything.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
can't remember
And
exactly where I was going to go with this question, but
no, but you know what? I wanted to put this out there because you're giving this whole description about like when we're operating in shame and there's the disassociation and then the way in which people act. I'm sat here and I can think of members of the community who I witnessed make all sorts of decisions over the years, and I can just see them moving across my memory going, and then they did this, and then they did that, and everything you're saying just makes me go, oh my god, this explains why so many of us maybe act in a way that we do. Trends that we've just sort of accepted. Well, people lurk and then they put in a good effort and then it becomes very overwhelming to them because they haven't processed their internal shame, and then they run away from it because they feel so and it's just yes, everything you're saying is just painting the absolute picture of what people are struggling with. And I think to the people listening to this, please pay attention, because this is just understand, like, the psychology behind so much of what we do is so prominent in this conversation. And I love how you bring up the emotion of it all, because this is the horse I have been flogging for the past whole time we've been doing this podcast. In our community, we are so good at talking about the fact that it makes us horny.
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
actually don't need you to explain to me, like, oh, did you know this makes me it makes me horny too. That's why we're here. Like, actually, I'm rather comprehensive on that front. But what about, like, and yes, gaining fulfills this sexual need, but what about your emotional needs? What about your spiritual needs, your social needs? Like, you are this whole person 24 hours a day. Like, yes, you are enjoying it in this particular facet, and you should love it and appreciate it and value it in all of those ways. But what about every other minute of the day? Because the moment you come and then you clean yourself up and you have to look in the mirror, and frankly, my dear, unlike every other kink and fetish, it's not that you get to put it down and put it away in a box and not look at it again. You are wearing it with you. I am wearing my sense of gaining on this call right now. I wear it in my work day. I wear it when I'm with my partner, when I'm with my family. It is with you 24/7. How are you okay with it? If you only look at it in a sex context, there must be more to the conversation. And I'm just so like, oh my god, thank you
I
for
feel
just being here
well.
and saying this.
I'm actually feeling emotional because I feel your relief. I feel the relief that you're feeling. So thank you for doing that.
Well, and so often, like I said, the isolating nature of it, it's also because like you just want somebody to tell you that you're not weird for liking what you like. Because, you you look around at your peer group and you like I said, I'm a leather man. So when I look at like the other leather men that I know and the other things that they're into, oh, like maybe two of them are also into like what I'm into as well, you know? So it's like, it's so nice to hear somebody say, you're not fucked up. You just like certain things.
Right. And again, if we can stop pathologizing ourselves and stop, internalizing the messages, again, I just see it as like it's so radical. I'm just really into this idea that you're fighting systems when you're doing this. You are literally fighting the patriarchy and all the rest of the terrible systems we've got.
Absolutely.
And I actually hope that if you kind of get that it will
Hmm.
embolden you even more. You're not just doing this for yourself, which is really the most important thing, but you're also trying to change the world a little bit. And
Absolutely.
I think that's cool. I think it's really cool.
It's so true. When I think about what gaming has done for me as a person, because I grew up extremely skinny. I was 100 pounds, soaking wet with rain boots on at 21.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and look, to be frank, my whole family similar size, but I also know that growing up, I didn't have a good relationship with food. It was a response to trauma. I assume in many ways bad things were happening, and I just went, I'm not going to eat right now, and that was how I processed things. And so, as much as there is a clear sexual nature behind me doing what I'm doing,
Hmm.
there is also an undeniable facet that I lived my life shrinking myself down because I didn't think I deserved to take up space in this world, and that to proceed with the act of gaining is to take up space. And not just enough space, substantial space. It is not simply that I should have a one-bedroom apartment that barely fits all of my human needs. I'm allowed to have a three-bed with a pool, goddammit, semi-detached. I'm allowed to have a backyard, front yard, two cars in the driveway. I can have it all. Why can't I have it? And I should, because I deserve to, because I love myself. It is
Well, and
such a
that's,
freedom to do.
yeah, the deserving part, right? I mean, we're really talking about worthiness. We're always talking about worthiness for all humans. But I am sure that a lot of people did not grow up feeling worthy of pleasure, right? Because for food, I mean, food is all sorts of things, right? But it's pretty pleasurable. And so if you have if you aren't getting like other needs met, you might again go to an extreme as a child, either restricting or binging to feel something good, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
people what either way, and to feel in control. And
Mm,
so I love also, I'm really into sort of like the, paradox of things, right? And so to indulge is also to be in control of your life in this community, right?
absolutely.
And so again, I like that idea of taking control in the sort of opposite way. And
Mm,
that's what I do. The healthy, there are unhealthy parts in the kink world. There just are, right? I mean,
mm,
I do think some people are not necessarily treating themselves very well if they're re-traumatizing and they're not
mm.
getting any healing. And I do see that, and that doesn't usually go very well. But a lot of people have turned everything, and are now in control of how they feel, powerless or submissive, right? There's so much control in being
Mm.
submissive, or, there's so much control. And so again, I love the idea of all the paradox that exists with kink because I think it's very empowering. But you have to, the shame is something you kind of got to work at, right? We don't just
Mm.
release shame one day. We don't just wake up one day and say, like, I am no longer ashamed of myself. It's like you got to work at it and feed yourself good things, right?
Literally.
Yep. Yeah,
Literally.
literally and figure. I kind of pointed to my brain here,
Yeah.
but everything that's coming in needs to be positive for you. And, spit out the rest, literally. If you don't like it,
Absolutely.
spit it out. You don't have to
You
eat
know,
it.
it's so fascinating hearing this, and you shared before, like there's such a sense of what it means to push back against the patriarchy and push back against a lot of these things. And I do believe in so many ways, like the world would benefit from understanding gaining and fetism more. Not because I think that everyone needs to do it. I don't give a shit. Like it's not that, but like the message and the mythos behind it is everything that you can absolutely have. I even find just in my day-to-day, I am oftentimes the bigger person in a social group of people. If we go out to lunch, and then we have a nice lunch, and then the thing comes around of like, well, do you want to look at the dessert menu? And everybody, of course, is keyed up to be like, oh, no, we're not gonna. Bitch, shut the fuck up, I'm gonna look at the dessert menu, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
And the moment I say, well, I'm gonna get a dessert, you better believe everybody folds like a house of cards. Something's like, well, actually, now that you mention it, I was looking at the sticky toffee, but now that you mention it, I was going to have a look at the three scoop of that. And it's like, yes, when you operate in a space of, I don't say no to myself. If I want the thing, I give myself permission to have the thing. It also grants other people the permission to have access to the thing. And that's something that I didn't realize at the time that I was presenting as an opportunity to people in my day-to-day life. I just thought, I'm trying to walk around and be like fine with being in my bigger body, which I am, and I just hope that people aren't dicks about it. But I didn't realize that actually me living in my authenticity was inspiring people in some way, shape, or form to be like, no, I too can actually adopt something from this. I can learn something from this and occupy my space so much more. And when you look at some of the sex fantasies within gaining and fetism, you know, the dominance and the power, the sheer power that comes from people, and especially women. We've had the privilege in the last few years to be interviewing more and more female feties from that community, and the way in which these women will command a space, it is something to behold. And if those women were to turn it against you, baby, you better run in fear, because those women will let you have it. It's incredible. So even when you were saying like the power, like the experience of as a woman having to shrink yourself and, you know, prioritize someone else's pleasure, fetism actively says, no, you are front and center in the driver's seat. Have your cake and eat it too. And it's just like, there are so fewer things in our society where we actually allow for, like, you can have everything.
Right.
We're always like, there's got to be something that you don't have. And, like, no. This is one of those times where it's like, you can have it all. Have it at 110%. Go for gold. In fact, go for platinum. It's fabulous.
And what you're describing with the dessert thing, I love that, right? What you're doing is you are speaking what everyone is feeling, and they're in their shame. And so you model, oh, I want what I want. God, I've been thinking about this the whole meal. Like, what? And so you're modeling this courage, you're modeling something, and you are giving a gift. I liken it to, I feel my most full embodied self when I'm dancing, specifically to 90s hip hop, but that's beside the point. And I will always be one of the first people on the dance floor, because what I know is that there are 20 people standing around here who wish they had the courage to do it, because they want to be there more than anything. I watch them, they're dancing on the side, and I'll just do it for them. Because, and by the way, it's vulnerable. I actually don't enjoy doing it at all. But I really feel like I'm modeling something. I'm modeling courage, and I'm modeling, I want to dance. So I'm going to do it first. And then I know people follow. You know, I don't stay out there, you know, alone very long. But so again, we're talking about courage to be fully embodied, right? To take up space, to, you know, say what we want, to get what we want, and to not settle. It's about not settling. And I think we settle all the time in our lives. I think we do this a lot. I think we do it a lot in relationships. If we do not kind of take care of our sort of internal sense of self, I think we're willing to settle a lot. I'll speak for myself.
No, I'd absolutely agree with that. You know, there is such a conversation within the community about this desire to find someone to partner with who shares the same desires, and very rarely, it seems, do we actually find people who we can connect with on that front. And there are logistical issues, right? The sheer number of people, the global spread, and by the time you actually get to that part, now you have to like them as a person, now you get to the rest of it. Like, it is challenging. But there is certainly something to be said that those moments of you either stick it out or you make do. And I think it is very easy to make do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I think a mission like gaining, because this is also the thing. People have insinuated that weight gain should be the easiest thing in the world because obese people exist. But the thing is, if you're a gainer, 99 times out of 100, you started off skinny. That's why you want it, because you aren't it. You want to become the thing. And if you were so naturally inclined to become the thing, you'd already be fat. You wouldn't be giving it a second thought. So clearly, you need to think about it and be intentional to make changes to your diet, your lifestyle, all of the things to actually achieve the goal. And something like gaining really does sort of, when you're actively engaging with it, it causes you to sit on that sense of a simmer. You're constantly, like, maybe you, not resting on your laurels, but you're primed a little bit. Even if you're at a point of rest, you're still like, I'm seeing what's going on around me. I'm thinking about what I'm going to be having for dinner, and I'm thinking about my budget. I'm thinking about my socials, I'm thinking about all this. So, like, I think it is something that grants the potential to have a greater sense of, I'm actively engaged in my life. I'm not maybe taking a step back as much as maybe we might do in other areas,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, given your experience with like the tension between fantasy and real arousal and the shame that people, often feel wanting more or less, how do you help clients make sense of their own desire or lack thereof? Because quite often in our community, you will come across people who identify as belly sexual,
Mm.
meaning that they only want attention to their belly or they want to pay attention to someone else's belly, but they don't want any other sexual contact of any kind beyond that.
Yeah. So again, I sort of go back to, I think, what maybe one of my first points, which is decoupling and getting clear about things like desire, arousal, and behavior, and identity, and fantasy, frankly. So there are different levels of what it means to be turned on by this, right? There's a brain turn on that I only want to keep in fantasy. There is, how you want to act it out, genitals, non-genitals, whatever. And so kind of teasing those out. So, and I don't know if it's helpful to kind of explain, but, I think people do get confused. So desire is what you're drawn to or curious about. Desire is in your brain. Arousal is what your body does physiologically in response to stimuli, or spontaneously, maybe. Not as much when we get older. We're not as spontaneous with, erections and things like that as we once were. And then, of course, behavior is what you actually, physically engage in. Okay. And so I think understanding there is no right or wrong. And I do think that people tend to say, if I only want it, belly, am I not, is it like, am I not legitimate in this? Or am I only legitimate if I do it this way? And again, that's that, am I normal? Do I fit in? Because certainly when you have a smaller community, you really want to fit in with that community, right? Because you're already, as you're sort of talking about, in this like tiny group, you've already become a little more isolated. And so we do want to look around, we compare, we want to look to our left and right and go, okay, I'm somewhere in the middle. And we want to feel kind of in the middle of thing. So we do want to, I think, first and foremost, just normalize that non-genital or even asexual eroticism, right? It doesn't involve sex. The intimacy is around feeding or fullness or, being witnessed or watched. And that asexual identities still can include fantasy or kink or sensuality, but they don't have anything to do usually with sexual behavior. Okay. And so again, I think just making space for all of that, right? And in desire discrepancies, you're kind of looking at the function of the desire, not like how often, right? It's always like, do you want more or less sex? Or are we doing it too much or too little or whatever? But how does this desire function for you? Like, when you feel desirous, tell me how that is for you, right? And so again, bringing curiosity. The number one thing I would say, if you learn nothing on this podcast, it would be to bring curiosity and less judgment. More curiosity, less judgment about yourself, right? Self-compassion, and about others. Tell me more about that. I don't know much about that. Tell me more, rather than, ugh, okay, that never heard of that, right? And tone will tell you a lot, right? So, again, bringing that curiosity and not looking at desire discrepancies as I'm too little and you're too much, or I'm somehow depriving you if I don't want exactly what you want. Because when we talk about deprivation, then we're really tapping into old stuff, right? Because as you said, a lot of us grow up in deprivation around food or messages of staying small. And so you don't want to do anything that provokes that deprivation. The radical part is to do it totally differently. But just to really make space for any sort of gaps, like, there's a fantasy arousal gap often, right? So fantasy is often limitless and it's just ours. So it's very one-sided. It's not usually relational necessarily. And often it's not really always based in reality. But real bodies behaving, sexually, that requires way more consent and care and limits and feedback and communication and all this stuff. And so fantasy is not always going to be like a blueprint for what you want to do. It can just be fantasy. And we want to encourage people sharing fantasies. I know a lot of couples that I work with will be like, well, I could never share the fantasy because they're going to think I want to do it in real life. Well, guess what? Some fantasies you might actually choose to do in real life, but a lot of them can remain fantasies. They're just turn-ons. So I also think we don't want to be scared by people sharing their fantasies. I think we can, again, be curious. Is that a fantasy you want to act on, or is that a fantasy that you just enjoy holding in your mind and thinking about, but don't really need to act on it?
100%. I mean, inflation kink, very big for a lot of people. That's a way that people explore the idea of growth. Same thing with padding. Ways in which people explore the notion of replicating size without actually accruing size. It doesn't invalidate it. It doesn't mean that you're a baby gainer waiting to happen. It just means that that's your particular flavor of experiencing this narrative. And if that's what's right for you, go for it. Don't let anybody hold you back. Understanding what is right for you, I think, is a very big part of all this. And again, I love a lot of what you're saying. Talking, something you mentioned very early on, for some people, they might look at this as this is their whole thing. And for some people, maybe it is just a very minute kink. It always makes me think of the Catherine Gates sex map, which I find so deeply fascinating. The ways in which so many kink ideas live in relation to one another, and very much explains a sense of why someone might drop the pin and say, this is my main thing, but then all the kind of surrounding circulatory stuff is like, we'll see what happens. Very fascinating the way that all of that comes together. Brooke, this has been such a fantastic conversation. I am feeling nothing but smiles because so much of what you said affirms like the mission that we are trying to do with this podcast, and just feels like it is already beginning to fill in so many of the knowledge gaps about my own understanding of myself and what I imagine so many of the listeners must be feeling as well. I want to ask you here, because we've talked around so much. If you were to what would you say is the biggest takeaway you would want our listeners to have from today's conversation?
Well, I think you're normal, you're beautiful, you like what you like, work on the internalized shame, and live your life and communicate. And people need to earn the right to hear about what turns you on. They have to earn the right to hold your vulnerability, and that, you are here. We don't want to, go out of this life thinking that all we did was shrink ourselves and mold ourselves. First of all, you'll get sick, because I do believe that when we shrink ourselves, we actually make ourselves sick. So that's one thing. But also, what a waste. What a waste not to be your full, beautiful self. And that may be a journey, and that may take years and years and years. but keep moving toward that, because we all really are worthy of love, belonging, connection, being seen and being validated. And we can't do that if we're wearing a mask, because you can't have real connection when you're wearing a mask all the time.
This has just been an absolutely fantastic conversation, Brooke. Thank you so much for everything today. We are definitely going to need you back for a part 2. I am already sat here predicting the DMs and emails we're going to get from people going, "What? How dare you not have asked about all of these things? We need to know all of the answers." So please, for part 2, be fully prepared that we might have to come in with a whole slew of questions and queries from people who are so desperate to hear more from you. But in the meantime, for anyone who might want to look you up online, where can the people find you online?
So my website is brookebralovepsychotherapy, and Instagram and Facebook are at Brooke Bralove Psychotherapy. I'm also on TikTok, I think BB Psychotherapy. Yeah. And thank you both so much. This has been, I'll be honest, I was a little bit anxious today. This felt a little bit outside of my realm, and I just want to own that. And so I'm really appreciative, and I've really enjoyed this and getting to know both of you, and just also realizing that I actually do hold, a lot, right? Whether I'm in a certain community or not, I do have something to add, and that feels really good to me. So thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you so
honesty.
much for coming on.
My God, this is so good. Oh my gosh, I am already so looking forward to next time. But y'all, that is a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, our incredible guest, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram at thiccymouse and Grommr at orpheus. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or visit our website at podpage.com/thiccradio. If you'd like to become a financial supporter of the show, you can donate through our PayPal, and you can always email us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Spotify podcast
Artwork, media design, editing, and production by James Heinzen.
with original theme music by CYMK.